What if one of the most chilling thrillers of the 1980s wasn't really about war at all, but about a mistake? A curious teenager, a modem, and one wrong connection were all it took to push the world toward catastrophe. But behind the screen of WarGames lies an even stranger story. Rewritten scripts, casting twists, near disasters, and a movie that didn't stay fiction for long. Stay until the end, because this is one of those rare films whose impact reached far beyond Hollywood. Number 1. WarGames was born from two completely different stories. WarGames did not begin as the movie audiences eventually saw. In its earliest form, it was created from two separate ideas that had nothing obvious in common. Writer Lawrence Lasker was inspired after watching a television documentary about Stephen Hawking. What stayed with him was the image of a brilliant mind trapped inside a failing body, racing against time to pass on something important before it disappeared. That inspired one version of the story, an aging genius nearing the end of his life, desperate to leave knowledge behind. At the same time, Walter F. Parks imagined a completely different kind of genius. Not old, but young, a teenager, brilliant, impulsive, and underestimated by every adult around him. Those two concepts were merged into an early script titled The Genius. Even then, the foundation of the future film was already there. One genius with wisdom, one with raw instinct. One at the end of the road, one just beginning. But once the writers began researching emerging computer culture, everything changed. With help from experts at the SRI International, they realized the younger character was becoming far more dangerous and far more interesting. An older genius preserving knowledge was compelling. But a teenage hacker with a modem, a phone line, and enough curiosity to wander somewhere he absolutely should not, that felt explosive. So the older storyline slowly faded away. The teenager became the center, and the genius transformed into WarGames. That's the real origin of the movie, not one perfect idea from the start, but two different stories colliding until the riskier one won. Number 2. Hollywood didn't know what kind of movie WarGames was. Even after WarGames found its identity, getting the film made was still an uphill battle. The problem was not the script, it was that Hollywood had no clear category for it. In the early 1980s, a thriller built around computers, phone lines, military systems, and a teenage hacker sounded bizarre. Studios understood war films. They understood teen comedies. They understood science fiction. But WarGames existed somewhere between all three. It had military stakes, but no battlefield. It had advanced technology, but not in the flashy space future style executives usually connected with science fiction. And it had a teenage lead, but it was not a light coming-of-age story. That confusion hurt the project. Many people in the industry simply labeled it sci-fi, but that missed the point entirely. Calling it science fiction made it sound distant and imaginary, while the script was trying to say the opposite. This was not about some far-off future. It was about a world already beginning to arrive. One modem, one system, one wrong move at a time. Producer Leonard Goldberg carried the project around town, but the reaction was often less, "This is the next big thriller," and more, "What exactly is this?" Universal Pictures was only willing to fund it at around $8 million. That was real money, but not enough for the scale the filmmakers needed. The story required command centers, military hardware, giant computer systems, and a believable sense of danger. Then real life unexpectedly helped. News broke that the US military had once briefly believed it was under attack because of a simulation tape placed in the wrong machine. Suddenly, the script no longer felt strange or speculative. It felt possible. That changed everything. The movie stopped sounding like odd science fiction and started sounding like a brand new kind of suspense film. Soon, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and United Artists backed the project, and the budget rose to $12 million. So WarGames nearly died for one simple reason. The danger was real, but Hollywood had not learned the genre yet. Number 3. WarGames nearly became a completely different film. WarGames almost turned into a very different movie, not because the script changed, but because the director did. The first director attached to the project was Martin Brest. Today, that may sound like a minor behind-the-scenes detail, but at the time it was a major turning point. Once filming began, it quickly became clear that Brest was making a different version of the movie than the one everyone else thought they were making. That was a serious problem, because WarGames only works if it begins in one world and slowly transforms into another. At first, the story has to feel like a clever teenager messing around. A little curiosity, a little rebellion, a smart kid poking at a machine because he believes he can. Then, step by step, the film must tighten until that same curiosity becomes terrifying. That slow shift is the entire magic of the movie. But Brest was pushing the tone darker from the very beginning. More severe, less youthful energy, more direct threat. And once that happened, everything changed. David Lightman no longer felt like a kid who accidentally wandered into danger. He began to feel like someone who belonged in a colder, harsher film. That is when creative disagreements became real production trouble. Brest wanted rewrites, while writers Lawrence Lasker and Walter F. Parks began feeling the movie slipping away from the identity they had built. This was not just a director adding style. The soul of the film was changing while cameras were already rolling. So the studio made a brutal decision. Roughly 2 weeks into production, Martin Brest was fired. That is what makes this chapter so wild. Most director changes happen before filming starts, when studios can quietly regroup. WarGames had to make that decision in the middle of the race, and that change likely saved more than the schedule. It saved the tone. Because if the film had stayed on that first path, it might still have been a thriller. But it would not have been the movie audiences remember today. Number 4. A new director had to rescue the movie mid-production. When Martin Brest was removed, WarGames was not calmly waiting for a replacement. The production was already unstable. Filming had begun. The tone was drifting. Even the young stars, Matthew Broderick and Ali Sheedy, reportedly were unsure what the fallout would mean for them. That alone shows how shaky things had become. Then John Badham stepped in, but he was not inheriting a healthy movie. He was walking into one that needed to be repaired immediately. One of his first moves said everything. He brought writers Lawrence Lasker and Walter F. Parks back into the creative process. They had been pushed aside during the earlier conflict, and Badham restored them because the film had moved too far from its original shape. That was not a small correction. It was a reset. But the biggest fix was tone. Badham understood that the opening of the movie had become too serious too quickly. If audiences start in full doomsday mode, there is nowhere for the tension to grow. WarGames only works if it begins lighter, curious, funny, reckless. You need to believe David is simply a smart teenager having fun before the film reveals how dangerous his actions truly are. So Badham loosened everything. He let Matthew Broderick and Ali Sheedy feel younger, sharper, more natural, and more playful. Once that happened, the movie began breathing differently. Now the danger had room to build instead of arriving too early. That is why his takeover mattered so much. He did not just continue the movie, he saved it from locking into the wrong version forever. Number 5. Matthew Broderick won the role in an unusual way. To make David Lightman believable, WarGames needed the right kind of lead. Not a traditional movie hero, not someone overly polished. They needed a kid who looked bright, confident, and careless in exactly the way real teenagers often are. Matthew Broderick had that energy almost immediately. He was only around 20 years old at the time, and was still better known for stage work than for leading a major studio film. But the strangest part is how he landed the role. Instead of going through the usual screen test process, Broderick reportedly followed his father's advice and sent in videotaped scenes from another movie. The producers watched the footage and quickly felt they had found their David. That says something important. What they wanted in the character was already visible in Broderick before he ever stepped onto the set. Then, production worked to build the rest of the illusion. Because David spends so much time in arcades, the filmmakers wanted that world to feel natural. Full-size arcade machines were reportedly delivered to Broderick's home, where he spent weeks practicing so he would move through that environment like someone who truly belonged there. Not like an actor pretending for a few days, but like a teenager who had already lived in that world. And it worked. His body language around the machines feels relaxed, casual, and authentic. But there was one funny problem left. For a movie built around hacking, keyboards, and speed, Broderick reportedly was not a fast typist. So the production had to protect a different illusion using camera angles, editing, and clever staging to make David appear like a lightning fast computer operator. That is what makes the casting so perfect. WarGames did not find a real computer genius and turn him into a star. It found the exact face, intelligence, and charm the role needed, then quietly built the myth around him. Number 6. Jennifer was originally a much smaller character. When people watch WarGames today, the chemistry between David and Jennifer feels completely natural. Their banter, the tension, the push and pull, it feels like the movie was always designed around both of them. But that was not the original plan. At first, Jennifer Parker was a much smaller character. She was closer to a supporting function than a true co-lead. The girl beside the story, while David drove all the action. In a movie centered on computers, military panic, and one teenager opening the wrong door, that kind of character can disappear quickly. Then Ally Sheedy arrived and changed everything. She did not play Jennifer like background support. She brought attitude, timing, intelligence, and a sharper point of view. Once she and Matthew Broderick started working together, the chemistry became too strong for the filmmakers to ignore. Their scenes had more life, more friction, more balance. So the production leaned into it. Jennifer gradually received more room in the story and became something much bigger than originally intended. She stopped feeling like the girl tagging along and started feeling essential. She questions David, pushes back against him, sees the danger faster than he does. And she helps ground the story in what all of this would actually feel like for two teenagers suddenly trapped inside a global crisis. That shift changed the movie. Without her, WarGames is one smart kid, one machine, and a countdown clock. With her, it becomes a partnership. And that partnership is one of the reasons the film still feels so watchable today. Number 7. John Lennon was once considered for a major role. One of the strangest casting stories connected to WarGames involves a name few people would ever expect: John Lennon. For a period during development, Lennon was reportedly being considered for the role of Dr. Stephen Falcon. And this was not some tiny cameo. Falcon is the man waiting near the end of the movie with enormous emotional weight on his shoulders. He changes the tone of the entire story. Up to that point, the film is about teenage curiosity colliding with military panic. But once Falcon appears, the movie becomes something deeper. Now it is also about the man who helped create the danger in the first place. That role almost had a completely different face. Lennon was reportedly discussed and had shown interest, meaning WarGames came surprisingly close to ending with one of the most famous people on Earth stepping into its final act. You can instantly imagine how different that version would have felt. More mystery, more celebrity presence, more audience distraction from simply asking, "Wait, is that really him?" Then real life changed everything. John Lennon was killed in December 1980 while the script was still developing, and the possibility disappeared with him. The role eventually went to John Wood, and that turned out to be exactly what the movie needed. Wood did not arrive like a surprise celebrity. He arrived like a man already carrying regret, tired, brilliant, emotionally worn down. He gave Falcon a quiet sadness that made the ending land harder. Because now the movie was not only about stopping a machine, it was about confronting the kind of intelligence that built one without fully understanding what it could become. So WarGames did not just almost cast a different actor. It almost created a completely different emotional ending. Number 8. Joshua's voice almost never happened. The second WarGames lets Joshua speak. The computer instantly feels alive. That calm tone, that strange politeness, and one unforgettable line. "Shall we play a game?" It sounds like an invitation and a threat at the same time. Today, Joshua's voice feels inseparable from the movie. But for a while, the voice almost did not exist at all. Early in development, there was real debate over whether the supercomputer should speak. A talking machine can go wrong quickly. If it sounds too robotic, audiences laugh. If it sounds too human, it feels fake in another way. One safer idea was to keep Joshua silent and only show its words on a screen. That may have worked technically, but it would have made the machine feel smaller. Once the filmmakers decided Joshua needed a voice, they unlocked what made the computer memorable. Now the machine was not just calculating in the background. It was present, curious, responding. Then came the smartest twist. Joshua's voice was performed by John Wood, the same actor playing Dr. Falcon. So when the machine speaks, it is speaking with the voice of the man who created it. That immediately links Joshua to Falcon, almost as if part of its creator is trapped inside the system. The production reportedly pushed the effect even further by manipulating the vocal rhythm, giving Joshua an odd cadence that sounded calm and human on the surface, but slightly unnatural underneath. Not enough to break the illusion, just enough to make audiences uneasy. That is why the voice stayed with people for decades. Joshua does not sound like a simple special effect. It sounds like a mind trying to imitate humanity and getting close enough to be disturbing. Number 9. The War Room was one of the most expensive sets of its time. Once the budget for WarGames finally reached the level the filmmakers needed, they spent part of that money on the one thing this story absolutely could not fake: the War Room. They did not build a small corner set and rely on camera tricks. They created a massive combat operations center on one of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's largest sound stages in Culver City. The moment you see it, the movie changes. Suddenly, this is no longer just a teenager playing with a computer. This is where governments panic. This is where the world could end. That scale is exactly why the room works so well. It has depth, multiple levels, rows of consoles, giant wall displays, and enough people moving through it that the place feels alive before anyone even raises their voice. The film does not need to tell you the stakes have grown. The room tells you. And the screens were not just lifeless props waiting for post-production effects. The filmmakers wanted the displays functioning while cameras rolled, so the set had to operate in real time. They reportedly used synchronized projectors, dozens of video monitors, and computers generating custom graphics for maps, missile paths, and countdown displays. They even built special lighting systems so the screens would register properly on film. That is how far they pushed it. The set reportedly cost around $1 million, making it one of the most expensive movie sets built at the time. And the funniest reaction came later. When real U.S. Air Force officers saw it, some were reportedly impressed enough to joke that if a movie could make NORAD look this good, why didn't the real NORAD look like that? That is when you know the money was well spent. The set did not just convince audiences. It made reality look under-designed. Number 10. The movie reportedly alarmed the White House. A lot of films claim they changed culture. WarGames is one of the rare ones that reportedly reached the highest levels of government. After Ronald Reagan watched the movie in 1983, he did not simply treat it as clever entertainment and move on. The premise stayed with him. A teenager accesses the wrong system. A dangerous chain reaction begins. Suddenly, a nation is facing life or death decisions before anyone fully understands what is happening. That was the part he reportedly could not ignore. So Reagan turned to his national security team and asked a direct question. Could something like this really happen? That is what makes the story so remarkable. The President of the United States was not asking whether the film got every technical detail right. He was asking whether the vulnerability underneath it was real. And the response he received was serious enough that the issue could not simply be laughed away as Hollywood fantasy. That is when the movie became more than entertainment. It became a warning. The conversation reportedly helped draw greater attention to computer security and communications vulnerability during the early 1980s, contributing to a broader push for stronger protections in the years that followed. So WarGames did not just leave audiences nervous. It reportedly left the most powerful office in America asking the exact same question that made the movie terrifying in the first place. What if this could really happen? Number 11. Real hackers helped shape the movie's technology. To make WarGames feel believable, the filmmakers knew they could not rely on fake science and random blinking lights. Computers were still mysterious to much of the public in the early 1980s, which meant audiences might accept almost anything. But the creators wanted the film to feel grounded in a world that was actually emerging. So they reportedly consulted people who understood real computer culture, hacking behavior, and telecommunications systems. That research helped shape everything from modem dialing sequences to password guessing, remote access, and the idea that a teenager with enough curiosity could wander into places never meant for the public. At the time, that concept sounded shocking. Today, it feels prophetic. The movie did not present hacking as a glamorous superpower. It showed it as experimentation, persistence, and someone poking around systems that were more vulnerable than people realized. That realism is one reason the film aged so well. Many older tech thrillers now feel cartoonish, but WarGames still feels unsettling because its core idea remains familiar. A smart person with ordinary tools can trigger extraordinary consequences. The production also understood something many films missed. Technology itself is not always evil. Often, the danger comes from human overconfidence, weak safeguards, and systems built without imagining the wrong person might reach them. That made WarGames smarter than many thrillers of its era. It was never just about a hacker. It was about a world connecting faster than it understood itself. Number 12. Every revival proved how special the original really was. A movie like WarGames should have had an easy second life. Its premise still works. Technology only became more relevant. The title still carries weight. On paper, a comeback sounded inevitable. But that is what makes the real story so strange. Every time WarGames tried to return, it came back smaller. The first major attempt was WarGames, The Dead Code. It updated the concept for a newer era, but it was released straight to DVD. No major theatrical event, no cultural moment, no feeling that Hollywood was truly bringing the franchise back. It felt less like a return and more like a quiet echo. Then it happened again in 2018. The property reappeared as an interactive digital project built around younger hackers, online identity, and modern fears surrounding technology. On paper, that idea made sense. The original film was already about young people entering systems far bigger than they understood. But once again, the impact stayed small. It arrived, tried its version of a comeback, and quickly faded from attention. That is the odd afterlife of WarGames. Not one failed revival, multiple attempts through different formats, each proving the same thing. You could update the technology, you could modernize the language, but you could not easily recreate the original shock. Because in 1983, the idea of one curious kid accidentally threatening the world felt new. Now we live in a world shaped by that fear. And that may be the greatest compliment the original film can receive. It was so ahead of its time that reality eventually caught up with it.